All right, so good morning. Anybody, I think Marisol, you might be joining us for the first time, which is totally fine. We've been studying Mishnah for over a year at this point, I think. Well, close to a year. We started with blessings and then we moved into Mishnah sort of soon after that. And we studied a whole tractate, not a whole tractate, a whole section of the Mishnah, Brachot. And now we're just taking a few weeks to do some Passover Mishnah. I wanted to just point this to everybody. This is the Haggadah. It's called the Haggadah Schechter. It's an art history and commentary. I don't know if anybody has this book, but I'll hold it up. Every year on Amazon, it sells out. It's a teacher of mine at the CY, at the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem, wrote it and compiled it. And basically first of all, it's very artistic. There's a lot of, here, I'm going to pull my papers out of it so you can see. Actually, no, I'm not, because it's holding my page. But in any case, there's a lot of really beautiful illustrations sort of throughout. And then the whole back section, well, there's an extra section on like, quote, extra illustrations. And then in the whole back is commentary. And it's really an amazing resource. So it's called the Schechter Haggadah, Art, History, and Commentary. And like I said, every year it gets sort of reprinted because of the season, and every year it goes. I got it while I was in Jerusalem, and it's an amazing resource. If you're interested by what we're learning and you ever want to sort of dive even further into it, you'll never get through this book. So I encourage you to check it out. So last time we were together,
Amanda.
Yes.
Would it be good for a mixed couple?
Mixed like
meaning Jewish, non-Jewish.
So I wouldn't use it as like to lead your Seder necessarily. So let me say, if you were the leader of the Seder, you might have it open to add commentaries and such. But I wouldn't buy like 15 copies and have everyone at the Seder using it. It's not that kind of Haggadah. It's very overwhelming. But yeah, of course. I mean, there's no reason why not. I mean, there's a lot of English. There's not a lot of English transliteration. So they're not transliterating from Hebrew to English characters, but they do translate to English translation. Okay, so
may I ask another question?
Sure.
How do you spell it in English?
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Books always entice me.
Do you have this one, Gary? No. Oh, he can't see. I don't know where you. Okay, we'll tell you later. The Schechter Haggadah.
Thank you.
The one on Amazon says 2015. Is that?
Let's do it at the end. I'll check it out. I'll check it out and see what the copyright is here. That sounds right, though. If it's a copyright, yeah. Okay, so last time we were together, last week, we started with Mishnah with Pesachim chapter 1, Mishnah 1, and we worked our way through those. And then we did a few 1 and 2 and 1 and 3, I believe. But anyway, the point of it is that we started together studying Bidikat Chametz, right? So we started by actually talking about how we, not how we clean, but how we check at the end of the cleaning, how we check for the Chametz. And then we looked a little bit at some of the foods that we eat. And then I have us skipping today all the way until chapter 10. And the reason for that is because the chapters in between, essentially 2.5 through 10, all have to do with the Korban Pesach, all have to do with the Passover sacrifice. So on the one hand, the Korban Pesach is a bit irrelevant, right? Because we're not actually making that sacrifice anymore. We're not bringing sacrifice to the temple. So that's on the one hand, right? On the other hand, I think it's important to acknowledge that the Mishnah takes 8 chapters to talk about the Korban Pesach, and it's nowhere in our Seder. Right? That's kind of interesting, right? That back, in those times when the Mishnah was written, the sort of central part of Pesach was the Korban. It was the sacrifice. And now we've moved away from that because if I asked you, okay, what's the central like item or central, like what's the thing that you think about when you talk about Pesach? The Seder or the Haggadah is probably the thing that would come to mind. And that's what chapter 10 is all about. So chapter 10 deals with the Seder and sort of eating the matzah and things that are around the Haggadah. So, just to note how much text there is on the Korban Pesach. And again, if that's interesting to you, always you should definitely look it up. It's really not in our Haggadah at all. We hardly mention it, which is quite interesting. But we're going to see a little bit of reference to it this morning. So we're going to start with. Yeah, was that somebody? No. Oh, okay. We are going to start with 10:1. So Arvei Pesachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. That on the eve of Passover, so we're talking about the day before, on the eve of Passover, adjacent to mincha time, a person may not eat until dark, so that he or she will be able to eat the matzah that night with a hearty appetite. So the first thing we learn here in chapter 10 is that we are supposed to sort of hold off on eating, right? There's some people actually, there's the fast of the firstborn, but also up until from mincha time all the way to your Seder, you're actually not supposed to eat anything. And the reason is not so that you're hungry for the brisket, right? It's so that you're hungry for the matzah. You want to be ready to eat your matzah and really feel fulfilled by the matzah, fulfilled, whatever that word means, or sort of like satiated by the matzah. We're waiting to get to that point. Samuch lemincha, close to mincha. So we've talked about this in this Mishnah in Brachot, actually, when we started about the halachic hours. So when I think about halachic hours, the easiest way to think about it is that the day is split into essentially 12 and 12, right? 12 days of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness. We know that that's not actually the case, but it's easiest for us to think about it if we just say 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So that's kind of our two sections. So Samuch lemincha is talking around about the 10th hour. So if you do that math, you get to about 3 or 4 o'clock, which is what you would expect for mincha time. And the reason that mincha was important was because mincha, or right before mincha, about a half an hour before mincha, is when they would bring the tamid offering. The tamid means always, or sort of regular. So the tamid offering, where they would bring the daily offering. So the mincha was important it was the last offering of the day for right before Pesach. And then you would not eat from then all the way until dinner. Ve'afilu anisha b'Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyesev. Even the poorest of Jews, even the poorest of people, should not eat the meal on Passover until he reclines on his left side, as free and wealthy people recline when they eat. Now, just remember that the bold is the direct translation from the Hebrew, and the non-bolded pieces are the ones that are sort of filling in. So just you might read it a little bit as commentary. But the point is that even the poorest of Jews should have the opportunity to be at the Seder, and they should experience what it's like to be essentially free, right? Because free people are the ones that can eat on a recline, and often do even throughout the year, right? It's not just something that's on Pesach. They can recline anytime they eat because they have that luxury to be able to do so. So it says even the poorest Jews should not eat the meal on Passover until he reclines on his. Now here we have the specific left side, as free and wealthy people recline when they eat. Velo yivchatu lo me'arba kosot shel yain ve'afilu min hatamchui. And the distributors of charity should not give a poor person less than 4 cups of wine. So the poor person should be able to recline, and the poor person should be able to have the 4 cups of wine that are required for the Seder as well. And this halacha applies even to a poor person of one who comes and takes from the tamchui, the charity plate. So the tamchui is it's exactly what it says, which is a charity plate. In other words, if you meet a certain criteria, so in the Mishnah of Peah, I believe, which is the book of Mishnah that comes right after Brachot, where we studied, right? We were about to sort of get there, but we didn't quite. Maybe we'll do it again in the fall. There's a lot of conversation about who is poor and who sort of qualifies as being poor. And it's a really touchy subject, right? Because somebody might feel like they should take from the tamchui because they needed something, and somebody who's in charge of the tamchui might say, well, there's somebody who's needy, more needy than you, or you don't really need it. And so there's a lot of discussion about what actually qualifies somebody to be poor, which is kind of interesting in our tradition, especially around, you don't want to embarrass somebody and et cetera. So there's lots of commentary and conversation around that. But just to say that the commentators on this particular Mishnah say that the tamchui is somebody who can't get more than 2 meals per day. And so that was somebody who was able to take from the plate. And then there were people in the community who walked around with the plate and made sure that people had what they needed. So you have those two people. You have the distributors of the tamchui that are giving out what people need. And then you have the receivers of the tamchui, which are essentially the neediest people in the town. And the both of those people should know that the poor person should have as much of a chance to get to a Seder and do it halachically correctly, right, with the 4 cups of wine and the matzah, as everybody else. So I think that's a nice way to open the 10th chapter, right? To sort of put everybody on a level playing field. And we do that a lot in Judaism, right? We want to acknowledge that there are people that are less fortunate than us, but we also want to sort of put everybody on a level playing field. We do that around death rituals, right? Everybody is wrapped in the same garments when they're buried. Nobody has this sort of fancy casket and everything else. It's like everything is very plain. And so just something to think about, that we, around our traditions, we do want everybody to sort of have a way to access the ritual and the tradition. Any thoughts on that first Mishnah? Any questions? Yeah, Irene.
Why left side? Why do you lean on the left?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been a lot of questions here about left and right, and I don't know that I always have the answers for why. But that's what you're supposed to do for the Seder, is you're supposed to lean to your left. And the idea is that it's because the rest of the year you might lean to your right, but why? I don't know. If anybody knows, feel free to if you've ever heard an answer to that question, feel free to weigh in. But I've never heard. Dara.
What I understand is that it comes from ancient Greek symposia when
Right.
people would eat on couches, and that's definitely what happened in the Roman Republic. And I guess since most people are right-handed, they would lean on couches on the left and use their right hands for eating. And I also want to say, also in the ancient world, the word right has the connotation of good, and the word left has the connotation of bad. And that's where we get the words dexterous for the right, from Latin, and also sinister, which means left in Latin.
Great.
But what I really think is that it allows you to use your right hand to eat, and it's an imitation of ancient practices.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that. Great. So that makes a lot of sense. I knew that it was from that period and about the couches, but I didn't really put the left and right together. That makes a lot of sense, that most people would be eating with their right hand. So great.
I would also add.
And for those of you who are left-handed, I don't know what to tell you. because when hold on one second, because actually, like, we sort of joke about that, but we studied just a couple weeks ago about tefillin and tzitzit and which way you hold. And generally, when the tradition says that you lean to your, if it tells you to do something on your left, but you're actually right-handed, that you should switch. And so that would be an interesting question here. Like, so if you feel like, Dara's going to come back in and explain it to us. Yeah. Make sure you unmute. Anyway. Yeah.
I had an explanation to that.
Interestingly, most people who are left-handed are also left dominant for language in their brain in terms of their hemisphere. So it sort of makes sense that for left-handed people, I think they maintain the same tefillin. Is that what we read, that for tefillin, even if you're left-handed, you do it the same as...
No, you actually don't. That's why it's kind of interesting. You're supposed to switch with tefillin. Yeah. And then the question was, do you switch with your seat also? Because you're supposed to hold the seat on the side that's closest to your heart. And as Ernie pointed out to us, just because you're not, right-handed doesn't mean your heart's on the other side. So you want to make sure to keep that consistent. So yeah, Gary.
Another thing with why you recline to the left is if you look at modern etiquette, you will always serve from the right side, whether you are left-handed or right-handed. So it's the sign of a free man that he has someone that someone is serving him, and they would serve to the right. So you would lean to the left so that they can serve you the food.
Great. There we go. Gary comes in with the etiquette. Yes. Iren.
I thought the etiquette is to serve from the left and remove from the right. And the other thing I was thinking, I mean, we'll have to check it out, Gary, but I think it's the opposite. And the other thing I was wondering, has the heart anything to do with the left side?
I mean, it does when we're talking about tefillin, but not, I don't know about here. I mean, that we'd have to go back to Dara for that and to give us the medical answer about, leaning on your left side near your heart when you're eating. I have no idea. But we really have, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure. There we go, Dara. Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to say anything about this. And you doctors will also know that there's a very rare condition called dextrocardia where the heart is on the right, which it's not supposed to be. But in that rare case, I wonder if it would be reversed.
I wonder if there's a tshuva written on that, right? A responsa written on if your heart is on the right side. Thank you, Dara. Any other thoughts? It's great. Tear the Mishnah apart. You're going to have lots of thoughts when you go into your Seder this year. Okay. Any other thoughts on this Mishnah? Questions, comments, thoughts? All right. So we've kind of leveled the playing field here, right, as we head into our Seder. So mazgu lo kos rishon. Remember, we talked about mazgu meaning to mix. That one has to mix the first cup of wine. So we couldn't, they weren't able to just take the wine from the bottle and drink it the way that we are today. They had to add water to sort of, to water it down to make it less alcohol content essentially, or it was very, very strong. So mazgul lo kos rishon, you take the first cup of wine, and now we have this machlochet, this Talmudic discussion between our two favorite characters, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So Beit Shammai says, Beit Shammai omrim mivarech al hayom ve'achar kach mivarech al hayayin. So first we bless on the day, and then we bless over the wine. Uveit Hillel omrim mivarech al hayayin ve'achar kach mivarech al hayom. And Beit Hillel says that one should recite the blessing over the wine, and then one should bless over the day. So we know that mostly we go with Beit Hillel, but before I actually go into it, just take a moment to think about it. Remember what we do for Shabbat, right? And because we learned that in Brachot, and tell me thoughts about which way you would, like reasons why you would do one or the other. So first you bless over the wine. If you were Beit Hillel, you would bless over the wine, Borei Pri Hagafen, and then you would say Hazmanim, right? I'm sorry. If you were Beit Shammai, I was reading the wrong thing. If you were Beit Shammai, you would say Hazmanim, you would bless over the day, and then you would say Borei Pri Hagafen, you would bless over the wine. And if you were Beit Hillel, you would say Borei Pri Hagafen first, and then you would say Hazmanim. So now, assume you can make your own choice. Which would you choose? You're blessing the wine first, or are you blessing the moed for the holiday? Yeah, Gary.
Well, if I remember correctly, we say first the thing that we do most often, right? Isn't that traditional role? So since we would most often say the blessing of the wine, because every time we have wine, we're supposed to say that blessing. Logic would say we say the wine first, and the blessing for the Hag, the day, would come second, because that only comes once a year.
Great. So that's Hillel. That's Beit Hillel, and that's his reason. And at least that's one of his reasons, and that's what he says. Yeah. Anybody else?
I would say that to resolve this issue, I would have someone say the wine first the day after, and someone else say.
You might split it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one Seder you do it one way, and the next Seder you do it the other way. Roz, did you want to say?
Oh, I just agree. I think you should do wine first.
Yeah. So Beit Hillel. Okay. So the reason that Beit Shammai says day and then wine, I do remember that he said this in Brachot, but I can't exactly remember his reasoning for it. So maybe somebody took notes. Beit Shammai says that the day causes the wine to be essentially inexistent, right? Like you wouldn't be drinking wine on that day if it wasn't for the day. So that's Beit Shammai's argument. Okay, right. So, okay, we can maybe get behind it, but it's not necessarily a great argument, but that's where Beit Shammai is coming from. And Beit Hillel, there's two reasons. The first is the presence that what Gary said, which is that you always do the most regular thing first. So we do wine more than we do moed or we do festival, right? So you would bless the wine before you bless the day, in the same way that you like that on Shabbat. And then the other reason is that, which is kind of interesting, kind of flips what Beit Hillel says, that the presence of the day, the presence of the wine causes the day. So like because we have because we're drinking wine, we know that there's like some sort of something festival happening. You could say that though for Shabbat as well, right? So it's not just because of the moed, because of the festival, but that's the reasoning that Beit Hillel goes, and we know most often that we side with Beit Hillel, and also that we've already had this argument in Brachot over the Shabbat, and so we're gonna take it as we're gonna trust him, and we're gonna go with Beit Hillel on that. Any thoughts, questions? Okay, we're gonna do number 3, sorry. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about what is happening in the Seder, what's brought first, etc. And I wanted to go through first, just to remind everybody of the order of the Seder, okay? This is the order that we use today. This is what's in our Haggadah, and these are the way that they're translated. So for example, maror, bitter herbs, we're going to use our sort of modern translation to understand what all of these things are, because they've changed just a little bit. So I'll remind you of the melody, at least the one that I do. And we'll get a little in the Pesach spirit. Kadesh orchatz karpas yachatz magid rachsa motzi matzah maror korech shulchan orech Safun barech halel nirtza. Okay, so there's the order of the Seder, a little Pesach nigun, right? Whatever, before, as we're starting our morning. And I just wanted to remind you all of what the Seder plate looks like also, which is important. So here we have Hazaret. Hazaret is translated as horseradish. Beitzah is the egg. Zroa is the shank bone. Maror is the bitter herbs. Charoset is the charoset. There's no translation, but you know it's that sort of apple, nutty, date maybe thing that that's on our Seder plate. And the karpas is considered as the parsley. This is important because Hazaret is a little bit unclear. We're going to see in this Mishnah about what actually Hazaret maybe is. I think it's still unclear today, honestly. Here again, it's translated as horseradish. I think that's where a lot of people put their horseradish. Yeah, Ruth?
Yeah, I always get confused there, because maror, in my opinion, is horseradish.
That's right.
Herbs. So
yes, I think that you probably are the majority opinion there, that people mostly put their bitter herbs, their horseradish where it says maror, and they put some sort of a vegetable where it says Hazaret. And so we're going to see what the Mishnah tells us to do. So, Heviu lefanav, the attendants, we assume that there were servants of some kind, but that's, again, commentary, brought vegetables before the leader. Now, already our Mishnah, the Sefaria translation of the Mishnah, is filling in the words for us. So it says, Heviu lefanav, which means that they brought it before them, right? There's nothing here that actually indicates the word vegetable. And so that should be your first question. What is it, right? Our commentators tell us that it's a vegetable, but it might not be a vegetable. It might just mean that they set the table. Another commentary said, they laid it before us. They sort of laid out the table, and here's all the things that are on the table. Mitabel b'chazeret ad shemagia leparperet hapat. And he dips the chazeret into water or vinegar. It's probably what we're familiar with, right? Like some sort of dipping to taste some food before he reaches the dessert of bread, i.e. the bitter herbs which were eaten after the matzah. So essentially the Hazaret is brought, and we don't actually know what the Hazaret is necessarily. So the one commentator said the Hazaret is the karpas, but if the Hazaret is the karpas, then what do you do with the karpas? And when somebody else said the Hazaret is a vegetable. The idea is that unlike today, maybe you do this a little bit. You can share, what your customs are in your family if you'd like, but the point is that there were appetizers of some kind that were brought before the matzah, right? There was some sort of an appetizer plate, whether it was like, vegetables or whatever. And it would seem like it was a lot of those. It was, because they wouldn't have mentioned it if it was just like a scrap of lettuce or something. It was like a significant amount of appetizer was brought before the matzah was brought out. Why, right? Why might we do that? Well, so what's sort of the main idea of the Seder? The main idea of the Seder is to get children to ask questions, right? We want people to be able to be prompted into asking questions, not that there's a prescribed list of questions like we know them, but that we're actually doing things in a different order to prompt children to ask questions. So one of the commentators tells us the reason that they brought appetizers, or that they brought like a sort of flow of vegetables or overflow of vegetables, is so that a child might say, what's going on? We don't normally do this. We don't normally have this level of appetizers before our meal. Why are they doing that? Now, ironically, today, we might not feel like it was strange if somebody came out and served us a salad before we had our chicken, right? Like it would be sort of normal. But back then it was clear that there was, the appetizer was maybe something that was out of the normal routine. And so the idea is that there was some sort of an appetizer, Hazaret, whatever that was brought out before the matzah. Now, parperet hapat. Parperet hapat. Pat actually means bread, which is kind of an interesting situation here. It doesn't say matzah, but just like we say motzi, we say motzi over matzah. So when they say pot here, they're actually referring to the piece of the Seder where it's the matzah. And obviously, we're not eating bread at our Seder. So then it switches the language. Heviu lefanav matzah v'chazeret v'charoset u'shnei tavshilin. So then they brought before them matzah and the chazeret and the charoset, and at least 2 cooked dishes in honor of the festival. So they brought the matzah then, right? Then the next thing to be brought was the matzah. And then the charoset, which was there's kind of different variations on what charoset is, but chopped apples, cinnamon, dates, etc. I'll come back to that. And two kinds of cooked dishes. Afal pisha ein charoset mitzvah, even though it says the charoset was not a mitzvah. So the matzah and the maror are commanded, are in the Torah, or in the Mishnah, but the charoset was outside of that list. And so it wasn't necessarily a mitzvah, but they said you should bring it anyway. Rabbi Eliezer bar Rabbi Tzadok omer mitzvah. But Rabbi Eliezer and Tzadok say actually it is a mitzvah to eat charoset on your Seder. And uvak disha hayu mevi'im lefanav gufo shel Pesach. And in the period of the temple stood, they offered the Paschal lamb. They brought him before the body of the Paschal lamb. So those are the things that come out first. Those are the things that are coming out at the Seder. And a few things to note. So the matzah we know is in the Torah, right? It says in our Torah that we're supposed to eat matzah. So that one's kind of maybe obvious. And the charoset is one that is not in the Torah and is not necessarily in the Mishnah as one of the things that are commanded at your Seder. And there's a differing of opinions as to whether or not it matters. There's also different commentators that say that different charosets should have different consistencies and tastes. So somebody mentions an apple having to do with fertility, and so putting an apple in there is important. You've probably heard the commentary around the charoset sort of supposed to look like or feel like mortar, right? The consistency of what you would use to put bricks together. So there's that commentary. Anybody heard anything else about charoset? Read anything up? Anything? Yeah. Are we, by show of hands, do most people make sweet charoset? Yeah. Okay. Irene, do you have a question?
That was my question. Isn't it more like a dessert?
Well, it's not a dessert in the Seder, meaning like it comes early in the Seder that it's not a dessert, but it's like it doesn't come at the end. But yes, it is typically made with some sort of a sweet wine and sweet or sweet fruits and things like that that make it seem like dessert. Like I've been known to eat it after, like during the week of Pesach as something that's sweet, not as something that's
Well, what I was thinking is when you look at the phrase that includes the haroset with the matzah and the cooked dishes, it almost looks like a full meal. The haroset would be at the end. The cooked meal in between.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that sort of building there, the matzah, the cooked meal, and the haroset might look like a meal. That's an interesting way to think about it. I don't know that it's necessarily meant that way. Gary?
There's nothing really inherently sweet in an Ashkenazi haroset, except we tend to use manischewitz, which is sweet, and apples. But in a Mizrahi one, it's clearly sweet because you use dates. And so, I mean, the difference is startling when you have a Mizrahi one. It is very sweet because of the dates.
Yeah, last year when we were supposed to, be on the plaza for, we were going to have like a little festival kind of before the Passover, and there was going to be a concert, and I had sort of set up the plaza. I hadn't obviously yet, but in my mind was setting up the plaza, and I had a haroset tasting station because I wanted to lay them all out and try the different ones, which I thought would be really interesting. And I'm sure that people have. I know that that I've seen at different seders that people have different variations on it. Some people make different ones. Here comes the Mizrahi, right? Raz, you're going to tell us about Mizrahi haroset? No. Ernst, yeah?
Yeah. I agree with Gary that it is the Sephardic one is sweet because of the dates, but I think a lot of Ashkenazi add honey to the haroset. In addition to the apples and nuts, there's honey in it, and honey has fructose, a lot of fructose, and fructose is sweeter than sucrose.
Sure. Yeah, there are people on this call that are way more expert in making haroset than I've never actually made it before, but I trust you, and I see some nodding that definitely most people lean sweet. Raz, did you want to say about haroset?
Oh, the one that I make is I do roasted sesame seeds, like a lot, and then a ton of dates and raisins and wine, and that's really it.
Yeah.
That is super, super sweet.
Yeah. See, next year when we're back together in person and we live out my dream of the haroset tasting station, you'll bring one of them. Ruth too, you're nodding. I can see you make one also. Sandy.
Highly alcoholic.
So we don't say a blessing over the harosets.
Over the haroset. No, we do it as part of this Hillel sandwich. When we put the haroset inside, but there isn't a blessing over the haroset.
Well, and the Hillel sandwich is always confusing too.
Why?
Well, there's no blessing, and we put some horseradish. I mean,
you kind of put whatever you want in there,
right?
right. You have this. You have the bitter, and you have the sweet, and then you have the matzah. No, it's interesting. The commentaries around this Mishnah, the two rabbis, Eliezer ben Sadok, just one rabbi. Yeah, Rabbi Eliezer ben Sadok says that he actually, in the commentary, puts a blessing for haroset, and all the other rabbis say that it's not a commandment. So, because you would say, Baruch atah Adonai Elohim melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, like that we're commanded to do, except whatever. And most of the rabbis say no. Ruth, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that one of my daughters married to a Sephardic, her husband's Sephardic, from Sephardic tradition. And we always have this argument, which haroset is better.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. No, that's a good argument to have.
Things, along the way too.
But both sweet.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
both sweet. Okay, good. Ellen.
I just want to say, I make this Italian haroset that gets rave notices every year, and I love it. I eat it for the whole week afterwards. And it has not just dates, but oranges and dried cherries, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Great.
And who would like the recipe, I'm delighted to share.
Great. See, this is the Charosa tasting station. It's great. I have all the participants now for next year. Perfect. Okay. Any other thoughts on this Mishnah? Let me put the Mishnah back up on the screen, so you can all see what's happening here. Okay, so here's some of the order of what we see, you know, when things are brought to the table, and again the order of the Seder itself, and then what a typical Seder plate. So I guess so we should go back to the original question, which is, what is the Hazaret? We're not 100% sure, but I would lean vegetable. I would put like a lettuce or some sort of but that's why, you know, that's why also that there's so much, there's so many minchagim, there's so many different traditions around the karpas as well. It's not, here it's translated as parsley, but it really can be like anything that's pretty much anything that's green. Yeah, Sandy.
My mother didn't like parsley, so we always had radishes.
Yeah, I think that's common.
I mean, fresh radishes. Not...
Yeah. I mean, there is a little bit of, I guess, you know, with karpas, you might want to get like a little bit of bitterness. I think a radish would do that. Parsley definitely would do that. But it's not super clear. And again, the Hazaret definitely is just kind of, I don't know, vegetable of some sort. Like I said, there was a commentator that said that the Hazaret is the karpas, and then it's very confusing. Gary.
The way we differentiate between the maror and the Hazaret at our house is, one is the ground horseradish, and the other is the sticks of the raw horseradish. So
okay.
They're clearly differentiated. And usually I think what is written for the bitter is like arugula or any kind of bitter greens is used for the bitters, you know. But we use the sticks of the cut up raw horseradish.
So the raw is the Hazaret.
You know, I don't remember which.
You don't remember? Okay.
But I know we do the two.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't make any difference. Well, that's a good distinction though. Okay. So moving along, this is probably gonna be our last one, because I want to make sure that we have a sort of equal number of Mishnah for next week also. So this next piece of the Mishnah is about the 4 questions. Here are the 4 questions as they appear in your Haggadah today. Ma nishtana halayla hazot. It says hazeh, interestingly. Mikol haleilot. Okay, so why is this night different than all other nights? And then the answers here. Shabakol haleilot anu achlim chametzu matzah. On all other nights we eat leavened products, and on this night and maybe matzah, and tonight only matzah. Shabachol halilot anu ochlim sha'ar yirakot. On all other nights we eat all types of vegetables, and tonight only bitter herbs. So that could answer your question, right? Like I feel like I grew up with my grandmother would put a piece of lettuce on the Hazaret, and maybe if it was arugula, that was okay because it was bitter, but you wouldn't want to take just a piece of iceberg, I suppose, because you want it to have a little bitterness. Shebekol halilot ein anu matbilim afilu pa'am echat. On all other nights we don't dip our food even once, and on this night we dip twice. Shebekol halilot anu ochlim bein yoshvin ubein misubim halayla hazeh kulo misubim. And on all other nights we eat sitting or reclining, and on this night we only recline. So that was kind of the reference from the very beginning, right? So if you were wealthy, you would be reclining throughout the year, and on this night, but you might sit up to eat, right? You might sit up to drink your wine or whatever, but you would sort of lean most of the meal. And this says, on this night, we only recline. Yes, Irene. You're muted.
Ask a stupid question, and that was...
No stupid questions.
But if they don't bring up the fact that you drink 4 glasses of wine, is it because it's children who ask the question and they don't want to become alcoholics? Or is it because wine was so much used that it was a common thing anyway?
So the thing that we're going to see in the Mishnah in just a second is that the 4 questions are not meant to be the only questions. The 4 questions are meant to be prompts or sort of calling your attention to what is happening at the Seder, it's not the only pieces. So while I agree with you that it might feel strange to leave out the 4 cups of wine and why we do it, there are commentaries, by the way, around why 4, and it has to do with different moments of the Torah and things like that. I can show it to you, but the questions that we have here are not meant to be the end, right? You're supposed, like, one question is supposed to lead to a discussion. One question is supposed to lead to another question, and it's not actually supposed to be used as a list in the way that we do it. I mean, so now you've prompted me to go into the next Mishnah, so let's do it, and you can see. So mazgu lo kos sheni. So now we're going to mix our second cup again, right? They have to actually take it and mix it. V'kan haben shoel aviv ve'im ein da'at baben aviv melamo. So this kind of answers, kind of touches on what Iren was asking. The attendants pour the second cup for the leader of the Seder. And here, which, by the way, I don't believe it was just for the leader, but that's up to the commentators, right? Everybody should get their 4 cups, as it said in the first Mishnah. And here the son asks his father the questions about the differences between the Passover and the regular night. And if the son, ve'im ein da'at baben, if the son does not have the intelligence to ask on his own, his father teaches him the questions. So if you read the Mishnah sort of in the exact way, right? If you took the Mishnah and you applied this to your Seder, I was reading something last night. It said, I'm not here to ruin your Seder traditions. You should do it how you've always done it, and you shouldn't change anything based on this Mishnah. But it's just to say, if your children at the table are asking questions, you actually don't even need to do the 4 questions, because you've sort of accomplished what the Seder is supposed to accomplish. So if you put out your Hazaret and you sort of do an overflow of vegetables, and your child next to you says, Mom, why are you putting all of those out? You can say 4 questions, check, right? Technically, according to the Mishnah. The idea is to do things differently so that children are prompted to ask the question. Here the Mishnah says, if the son doesn't know, I don't love the word intelligence, but da'at, like da'at's like wisdom, right? Like if you're thinking about a small child, small children don't have wisdom. They might be intelligent, but they don't have sort of deep wisdom of knowing our traditions or sort of knowing what routines are. So if the child doesn't have the experience, let's say, to know what's different, the father should give him these prompts and should show him, well, on all other nights we do this, and all other nights we do this, and all other nights we do this, and tonight, here are the things that we're going to do differently. So here are the questions that we're going to ask, and somebody hopefully will notice the one that is the outlier. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot, shevekol halaylot anu achlim chametzu matzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. Okay, we know that one. Why is this different from all other nights? As on all other nights, we eat leavened bread, and matzah is preferred. On this night, all of our, quote, bread, all of everything that we eat is matzah. Shevekol halaylot anu ochlim sha'ar yirakot. Oh, do you have a question? Someone? No? Okay. Sha'ar yirakot halayla hazem maror. And on all other nights we eat vegetables, but on this night we eat only bitter herbs. Shevekol halaylot anu ochlim batzar tzali shaluk uvushal halayla hazeh kulo tzali. So this is the, okay. On all other nights we eat things that are roasted or stewed or cooked. But on this night, all the meat is roasted. Why? The commentary says because of the Paschal, because of the offering. Iren's shaking her finger. That's the one that's different. The final question was Shabachol halaylot anu matzbilim pa'am echat halayla hazeh. On all other nights, we dip the vegetables in a liquid during the meal only once, and on this night we dip twice. So again, I think above it, the translation said, we don't dip at all, but tonight we dip twice. Well, actually, the Mishnah is letting us know that we actually typically might dip, only one other time in a different part of the meal, and tonight we're actually dipping it 2 times. Ulefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamo matchil bignut umsayem b'shevach doresh me'arami oved avi ad sheigmor kol harparsha. And according to his intelligence, or again to his knowledge and the ability of his son, the father teaches him about the Exodus. So this is the Magid, right? He teaches him about the story of Exodus. When teaching his son about the Exodus, he begins with the Jewish people's disgrace. So he starts in what's the word that it says here? He starts in bignut, and then he ends in shevach. He ends in glory, and he expounds upon the passage, "An Aramean tried to destroy my father," which I brought here for us to see. The declaration one recites when presenting the first fruits at the temple, until he concludes explaining the entire section. So this is the piece of the Haggadah, right, where it says, either you can translate it as "my father was a wandering Aramean," or here it says, "An Aramean tried to destroy my father, Laban," right? "Go and learn what Laban the Aramean tried to do to our father Jacob, for Pharaoh decreed only against the males, while Laban tried to destroy everything, as it is said." This quote here, I'm now reading from the Haggadah. "An Aramean sought to destroy my father, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and there he became a nation, great, mighty, and populous." And then there's a whole section here in the Maggid about what happened there. He went down to Egypt, he sojourned there, few in number, etc., and all the commentaries around that. Thoughts? Yeah, Betsy, I see your hand.
So the commandment to only eat roasted vegetables, that was pulled after the temple was destroyed, because the custom now is absolutely not to eat roasted lamb.
That's right. That's right. So that's right. So after the sacrifice was no longer brought, we don't have roasted anymore.
But so that fifth kind of thing was in it.
Right. So the question is, I think the question that the commentators ask, and as usual get multiple answers, is were there 5 questions? Like was this meat roasted situation in addition to the 4 that we know, or was it substituted? It appears, the way that we read it here, right, we have 4 and 4, so it appears like it was swapped out for the roasted. We swapped out for the reclining question. But Rambam, I believe, says that actually there should be 5 questions, and that we should still have it in there. Again, there's really nothing. This would be like the only piece in our Seder that has any reference to the korban, and yes, because we're not doing that anymore, that's pulled out. Irene.
But does Betsy mean we don't we roast the bone of the lamb to put on the Seder plate?
The shank bone?
The shank bone?
Betsy, do you roast it?
Yeah. Wait. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm roasting it, because roasting meat was meant to be edible. The shank bone is meant to be burnt. You wouldn't want to even, I like gnawing on bones. You wouldn't want to gnaw on this. So I just stick it in aluminum foil in my oven while all the other stuff is cooking.
Yeah.
And it's just blackened.
And let it kind of burn. Yeah. Yeah, I guess roasted is kind of a technical.
Iran, yes, it's a custom to have that.
Yeah, the bone is like the symbol,
I mean,
right? But you're not. Sorry, the bone is like the symbol, but you're not actually eating it, I guess, would be the difference.
Right.
Yeah. But roasted is an interesting term. I mean, roasted as opposed. So here it says roasted. On all other nights we eat roasted, stewed, or cooked, but on this night the meat is the roasted meat of the Paschal. So it's only the roasted, roasted part.
But I don't think it's how people, I think it's the opposite of what people do now. I think people don't eat, it's certainly not lamb. I mean, maybe Sephardi communities do, but I think not. I think just.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right that most communities don't eat roasted meat. But as far as what we're talking about, roasting the bone for your plate, I think is okay because it's a symbol of.
I would compare that to when you take challah, when you take some of the dough and you burn it. It's a symbolic thing for the temple offering. It's not meant to be eaten. It's blackened so that you couldn't if you wanted to. It looks like charcoal.
Sure.
I think that the shank bone is the same. It's meant to be the temple sacrifice.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a symbol for sure. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? So I like this one a lot. I think it helps to explain. So the essence of the Seder is asking questions, right? And I think that we often get to this point in our Seder and we sort of look around and who's the youngest and pin the 4 questions on the youngest child, right? And that child has to do it. I was not the youngest, so I never really felt that, though. I've done them obviously many, many times. And I think that this kind of like can give us a little bit of a different perspective. That first of all the children are supposed to be asking, right? You wouldn't say, I mean, I guess the youngest custom comes from this idea of da'at, right? And here in the Mishnah translated as intelligence. Again, I don't love that word, but I like that we could think about it as like experience. So the older children don't necessarily have to ask the questions because they know the questions to ask. They have maybe more experience than the younger. That being said, the idea is that anybody who's a child at the table is supposed to be asking questions, and our job as adults, which we also should not forget, right? Our job as adults is to create an environment where children can feel safe to ask those questions and feel encouraged to ask those questions, but also that you should be doing things that prompt the child to ask a question. And so if the child's not asking any questions, you might say to the child, Riva, what do you notice that's different tonight that we don't do in other places in our meals? And so really we're supposed to be, this Mishnah is telling us like, okay, it's not just the prescribed list that's in your Haggadah. I'm only going to give you that list if we haven't created the environment enough that you ask your own questions. And I sort of like that framing because I think that there's often, especially when you get into the sort of nitty gritty of the Haggadah, like you can really get into reading every single word and going through all that Magid, and it's a lot. And so if you kind of go in with the framing of, we're supposed to make this accessible for those who don't have the da'at, right? Who don't have the intelligence or don't have the experience to know what to ask. That to me is sort of the essence of the Seder. And I think it's just a nice framing here. Any questions or thoughts? I don't want to go on because the next one's really long. So we'll start with it next week. So if anybody has anything to add, Marisol.
I just want to say that I appreciate your bringing that. You want to create the atmosphere of having the youngest ask the questions, and it doesn't have to be strictly the 4 questions. So it's a little less stressful, and it's just more enjoyable to enjoy your Seder.
Yeah, and that other people can be involved too, not just the youngest one. I think there's like sometimes a little bit of anxiety when you're the youngest, right? Like, oh, I have to know this in time for Pesach this year and make sure that I get this right. And really it's supposed to sort of be a community of children or, everybody at the table that are engaging in this conversation. Gary.
Are we going to study the Kazayat question?
Which part of it that you eat? I mean, we studied in Bidikat Hametz, we studied Kazayit, but. Well,
I meant for, the wine, it's your, people always come to a Seder and they say, well, I'll take a sip and I fulfill the mitzvah of drinking the wine. And, one of the things that we're very machmir about is you fill the glass to a certain level to make sure you fulfill the mitzvah, and you're supposed to drink the entire glass.
Yeah.
Because if you don't drink the amount, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. But the thing is, we don't know what a kazayit is, do we?
Well, a kazayit is an olive's worth. It's like this much.
That's when the debate, what kind of olives are they using? The little ones?
Well, yeah, but you're not going to get an olive like this. So you have some sort of frame of reference. I mean, I think, right? I mean, you wouldn't get.
I've seen debates on this, big debates on what is the minimum amount of wine you have to drink to fulfill the mitzvah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we definitely get some conversation around wine. I don't know if they talk about kazayit in this Mishnah, but I'll look ahead and see. Who else had there? Oh, Sandra.
Oh, yes. Somehow you didn't call on me earlier.
Oh, sorry.
When we talked about the leaning. And I remember my husband had studied this, and he was a physician and knew about physiology. It has to do with appetite or being filled somehow. And Dara's not here, but she could check this out. That when you lean the way it is prescribed, you can take in more. Oh. And so that's why.
Great. Yeah. I love that. Thanks, Sandra. Ruth.
I was once at one of our community Seders with Beth Sholom, and I think it was Rabbi Lou who also said you had to eat a certain amount of matzah each time. I don't remember how much it was, but it was a whole lot, much more than would eat.
I don't know. I've not heard a custom around how much matzah necessarily, though. But only that you're supposed to sort of be hungry by the time you get to the matzah, so that you can really sort of taste it and eat it. Eat it with feel like you're on an empty stomach. But I don't know about the amount. I can look into it, Betsy.
I was going to mention that too. People would be shocked to know how much matzah you actually are supposed to consume. And if people want, want to know certain things about what products you can use, if you're, trying to be more strict about your kitchen during Passover, the OU and the Circle K and another company that's based in the Chicago Rabbinic Association, they all have these booklets, and they all have a picture in the front of it that demonstrates like how much it is. And it's like more than most people want to eat, because most people don't love eating matzah.
Right, of course. Is anybody here looking to get more strict? Raise your hand. No, all right. Well, thank you.
It's there. You find the sort of images of how much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Sharkohet.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. Yes.
You're gonna look at your Schechter book.
Oh yeah, let me look at it. Hold on.